Hello and welcome everyone to our 19th podcast. I am Linda and here is Mike.
Hi, Linda. Welcome, everyone. In this podcast series, we are exploring social threefolding by reading and discussing the original 1919 basic book by Rudolf Steiner, The Core Points of the Social Question. We are currently in the middle of Chapter 2, which describes the principles and theory of social threefolding. In a threefold society, the three areas of social life, economics, rights, and culture, will be functionally separate, much like how the nervous, rhythmic, and metabolic systems are functionally separate in our physical body. The economic life is everything to do with the production, distribution, and consumption of goods. The rights life is everything to do with purely human-to-human relations. And the cultural life is everything to do with individual abilities. The economic life will be bounded on one side by the natural foundations, and on the other side by the independent rights life, or the life of public law, which will regulate the economy from outside. Economic relations between people have to do with serving the needs of our fellow human being. Rights relations concern how we treat each other as equals. If rights and economy are combined together into a single state structure, as they are today, these two principles will necessarily clash and corrupt each other. Therefore, it is a first priority to bring about a complete separation of state and economy. The state, the government, will have its own independent legislative and executive bodies, and the economic life will have its own independent associations and money system. Their leadership will meet as peers, like foreign dignitaries do today. Labor and real estate, which are rights issues, will no longer be exchanged for goods or for money representing goods. Labor and abilities cannot be separated from the human being who performs this labor or possesses these abilities. So neither labor nor abilities can be traded on economic markets. To avoid treating the human being like a commodity, we must only purchase and exchange the achievements, the products of human labor and abilities, not the labor and abilities themselves. In a threefold society, goods will strictly fall under the economic life, rights under the rights life, and abilities under the cultural life. These will be separated out and not blended together in such a way that the compensation for a right transforms that right into an economic good. Under Steiner's new labor framework, every working person has an obligation to provide labor, an obligation that is equal for all persons according to the democratic rights life. And alongside this obligation, there are, of course, also certain protective labor laws, regulations, and entitlements. And then parallel to this rights track, there is the economic track, which consists in the achievements or contributions each worker makes to the economic collective, as well as the share of the total collective product that returns to each worker, called the countervalue. The primary organ of a healthy economy, economic associations composed of representatives from all aspects of the economic life, will observe how the prices of goods relate to human need values, and then will dynamically increase or decrease production to ensure that market prices are healthy. So, associations ensure that everyone in society gets their needs met, while the rights life regulates the economic life from outside to ensure fairness between people. We must always keep in mind that in a healthy threefold society, the areas of social life are separated, not the people. Individual people transcend the structural separation and bring the independent areas of social life back together to form a coherent unity. If we want to create a better society, we must stretch beyond our existing habits of thinking that ultimately derive from past social forms and institutions. We must make the separation of state and economy a top priority, because As long as these remain fused, like they are today, there can be no healthy electoral system. The best leadership for the economy and the best leadership for the political rights life are two entirely separate questions that cannot be decided by a single vote. Indeed, the principle of democracy itself only applies to the political rights life, whereas the economic life should be administered by people with competence and experience through a network of local economic associations. Only once state and economy have become separate, as a demand of current human evolution, only then can we hope to establish a healthy and fair system for electing our political leaders. So let us not confuse what is practical with what is merely familiar. If we fail to develop new practical thinking, we will invariably make the same mistakes as those in the past who created our current institutions out of what they, at the time, believed was practical thinking, but which has led to so much social unhealth today. For instance, there is a tendency, based on habits of thinking, to consider economics to be synonymous with the private sector and the rights life or government to be synonymous with the public sector. But let us transcend this fixed way of thinking and instead imagine a situation where, say, the public, that is the government, owns infrastructure like bridges and highways, yet these are managed by private individuals, individuals who are vetted and selected neither by politicians nor by economic powers, but instead by people involved in the independent cultural life. If competent people were to select competent people to put in charge of privately managing the publicly owned infrastructure, then this would cut down on the nepotism and corruption that currently plagues public works. This is not socialism, nor is it a kind of privatization either. Rather, it is an entirely new ownership idea that Steiner will describe in much greater depth in the next chapter. For now, however, let us just take the point that a new way of thinking is necessary to solve problems that currently seem quite unsolvable within the narrow confines of our current unified society. Okay, does that bring us up to date?
Yes, it does. Beautifully.
Is there anything that you would like to say, Linda, before we get started?
No, I'm good. Good to
Okay.
get started.
All right, so let's switch over to the screen share now.
Mhm.
So last time we had read up to this paragraph on page 61. We can see clearly how. So we'd read this, and in this paragraph, Steiner outlines his new labor framework. So as we had said before, neither human labor nor individual abilities belong to the economic life. These belong to the rights life and the cultural life, respectively. So in a threefold society, goods or achievements, labor, and abilities are all separate. They're walled off from one another. And in a healthy society, the employer cannot purchase the labor, nor the effort, nor the time, nor the ability of any human being. Instead, the employer purchases only the other person's achievement, their product. So as goods arise within the economic life through a collaboration of the labor and the abilities provided by both workers and managers together, and if we add in the concept of the owner, who's ideally a social owner, they also contribute capital, which is the means of production. And all these contributors together collaborate to produce goods. And all of these deserve a fair contractual share of the collective product or the counter value of the product once it is sold on economic markets. So under this new labor framework, there's no adversarial struggle that arises when workers are paid by the hour. There's no antagonism that arises when workers want work to proceed slowly so they can get paid more, while managers want work to proceed quickly so they can reduce their payroll costs. And by replacing this adversarial relation with the new labor framework, all contributors now share in the countervalue of the collective product. So workers, managers, and owners will tend to be aligned toward the common goal of efficient production of what satisfies human needs. And in this way, the current antagonisms between worker and ruling class, between left and right, which have spilled over from the economic life into the political life in the form of the social question, will cease. But this end to antagonism can only be realized through a strict threefold separation between economic goods, rights relations, and the cultural life of abilities. So that's what we had read last time. Does that ring a bell?
That rings a big bell. Yes, it
Okay.
does.
So should we just continue on with the next paragraph then?
Let's do it.
This one, it starts at the bottom of 61 and carries over. It's not a long paragraph.
Mhm,
Through such regulation. You got it?
mhm. Yes.
So I'll just warm it up and say that basically labor relations by the rights life affect the value of a good, just as the natural conditions of a given region affects the value of a good. And if, for geographical reasons, the extraction of raw materials or the production of food is more or less difficult in a given region, then the value of the corresponding good will be higher or lower. And in a similar way, if the rights life places tight or loose restrictions on how much labor is allowed, this will likewise cause the value of goods to be higher or lower. Okay?
Got it. Yep.
Yeah, read that, please.
Yes. Through such regulation, a value basis is created for a good that can be compared to the other value bases that exist in natural conditions. Just as the value of a good increases in comparison to another because the extraction of raw materials is more difficult for it than for the other, so must the value of the good depend on what type and amount of labor is allowed to be applied to produce the good according to the legal system.
Okay, so again, Steiner is speaking in 1919 at a time when there weren't really labor laws like we have today. And he's saying, the decision to say how many hours of work that people should work, should it be 60 hours a week or 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week or whatever number, that will have a big implication for the economic life, won't it?
Mhm,
If people are all working 60 hours a week, there will just be that much more economic goods produced compared to if everyone is working 25 hours a week, let's say.
mhm,
And so it's kind of these two factors. But the
mhm,
economic life itself should not be allowed to decide what's a fair number of hours of work,
mhm, mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
right?
And it's the rights life that is the one that is to explore that and see what is in the given regions based on what kind of production is necessary. I mean, you gave the example of bananas and how easy that is just to pick off the bananas. Perhaps I don't even know. I've never grown bananas, so I don't know. But versus somebody having to harvest the wheat, grow the wheat, and all of the problems that that brings. So obviously, more labor is required uh, for the wheat than there is a banana, as far as I've understood.
Yeah.
So therefore, the nature will dictate that.
Yeah. On the one side, you have nature sort of dictating the
Mhm.
limits of the economy, and on the other side, you have the rights life dictating the other limits
Right.
of what humans are going to contribute,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Mhm. So the rights, the more restrictive they are, the more difficult then to get the produce or
Well,
production,
the
right?
the more restrictive the rights life is about how little, like, if the rights life says everyone should have long vacations and no one should work very hard, well, that's going to have a big impact on the economic life. And then the people, the democratic group who decides the about entitlements for vacations and working hours, they'll just have to accept the fact that they have less products to consume.
Hmm. Mhm. Mhm.
and they might be fine with that. So
Mhm.
that's something for them to decide.
Okay. So it's really like these, again, like you said, these two sort of different separate factions are really working to, like the rights life, looking to benefit the people in both ways. I mean, you got to eat and you also got to have a vacation. So, so what is the balance of that? And then the economic life kind of going, well, actually, if you want to eat, you need to work a couple of hours extra to get that kind of produce. Or so there's a kind of a discussion that goes on, even like on the outside, as you were saying. So one is separately discussing here's what a healthy human fair situation might be with a work life. Um, and on the other, it will be, well, if you have that much of a healthy sort of vacation, 6 month vacation,
Yeah,
you just expect to eat much less or, have less productivity kind of thing.
yeah,
So got
yeah.
it.
And Steiner added a footnote, a note number 25 to his. This is a Steiner note that he added to
Hmm.
the 1920 edition. And this is on page 72, and I'll just read it. It's short. And what Steiner added was to say, quote, such a relation of labor to the legal system will compel the associations active in the economic life to reckon with that which is lawful, like with a precondition. This will then achieve a dependency of the economic organization on people, not people on the economic organization. End quote. Right? So it's kind of like what you just said. The the economic life depends on what people decide. It's not that the economic life is going to swallow people up and decide how much they should work. It's the other way around. People should decide how much they're willing to work. And then, as we said, they have to accept the fact that they have more or fewer goods as a result of that decision. But that way, the people are deciding about the economic life, not the economic life deciding about the people.
Got it.
And by fusing the economic life and the government together, we don't really have that opportunity. We get swallowed up by this economic rights conglomerate. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, just finding that balance and the, you know, keeping in mind, I mean, each, like you keep on saying that everyone is involved in each of these areas. And so obviously, um, that the impact of the decision making will be felt on them. So yeah, one would hope. Yeah.
And it's done out
Okay.
of a consciousness and not a kind of falling into an unconscious situation, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to add a couple more thoughts, if you don't mind, that how in a threefold society where the legal system and the economic life are separate, then businesses and corporations will have to follow the law because they will no longer be part of the combined political system that creates the law. So,
Mm.
as is often the case today, big business interests hold a lot of power over political decision making. So, certain industries, for example, big tech, energy, pharma, investment banks, military, these industries can act with more or less impunity when they have politicians in their pockets. And in a threefold society, it's different. The economic associations will manage production, and the politicians will not be answerable to any of the economic industries. Politicians will be answerable only to citizens, to the democracy, and so they will put forth laws and regulations that govern the economy from the outside and will direct law enforcement to ensure that laws and regulations are adhered to.
Hmm.
So, if I could make an analogy, right? Let's say you have some kind of sport like football or soccer. is the referee an employee of one of the teams? This is the situation we have today where the economic life is kind of, they're the ones paying the referee. And so how can we even hope to have fair reffing in our system? And the way it's set up right now, it's not really a fair game.
Hmm.
I'm not commenting on soccer, I'm commenting on the government, right? So
Yeah.
the way our society is structured, imagine it was different, where the referees were not paid by the economic life and not responsible for the economic life.
Yeah. Ethically, I mean, that would be the gold sort of standard, right?
Yeah, it'd be cleaner, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Hmm. And I think you're speaking about, I think many of us understand that, the lobbyists and special interest groups have huge influence. And I think that the way that certainly I'm not quite sure if every government works this way, but certainly I understand in the US, um, politicians are like spending a gross amount of time just lobbying, like making phone calls to get funding. And it's usually the corporations or people who have money, businesses or yeah, that they then sort of, I guess the negotiation happens. Then yeah, I'll give you X amount if you do Y. So yeah.
Yeah, different countries have different laws about this, but
Hmm.
in the United States that you mentioned, it's actually protected under the First Amendment as a kind of uh, a right to freedom of speech,
Hmm.
to not place any limitations on political donations. It's considered, it would be anti-constitutional to put limits on donations. But in other countries, it is considered the better approach to limit donations.
Hmm. Hmm.
So different countries have different laws, and of course,
Right.
some countries are not democracies at all.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Point taken clearly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go on then. The next little paragraph in this way, Steiner says that essentially that the economic life is conditioned but from two sides, by the natural conditions and the legal foundation, and the economic life must accept both as given. It's kind of a wrap-up paragraph.
Hmm.
You could read that, please.
Sure. In this way, the economic life is subjected to necessary conditions from two sides, from the natural conditions, which humanity must accept as given, and from the legal foundation, which ought to be created from rights consciousness based on a political state that is independent of the economic life.
Okay. And then the next paragraph, he says essentially that because the economic life is bounded by these two sides, by the natural conditions and the legal foundation, the prosperity of people will depend in part upon their independent rights consciousness, on how much labor contribution they consider generally acceptable and compatible with human dignity. If rights consciousness considers more labor acceptable, then more will be produced, and society as a whole will be more prosperous. And if less labor is acceptable, then society as a whole will be less prosperous. Thus, rights consciousness serves to control the economic life and prevent people from being consumed by it. Rights consciousness gives people a dignified, humane existence, and it is indeed the lack of a healthy rights life that is the root cause of all the current social dissatisfaction. So we basically have talked about all this, so we'll just read it over quickly.
Okay. It is easy to see that through such a direction of the social organism, economic prosperity will rise and fall according to the amount of work that is expended out of rights consciousness. Only this dependency of economic prosperity on rights consciousness is necessary in a healthy social organism. It alone can prevent people from being so consumed by the economic life that they can no longer feel their existence as dignified and humane. And the presence of this feeling that existence is undignified and inhumane is, in truth, the basis for all the convulsions in the social organism.
So he's really highlighting the importance of the strength of the rights life in creating this fairness, dignified and humane existence. But he's also saying that it needs to be a small government that is only handling rights issues and not economic issues.
Mhm,
So it's a small but mighty government idea.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, again, somebody who is not very well versed in how government works, it certainly sounds like a better option than it is now. Um, I think it's important to recognize that, slavery has been with us for centuries upon centuries and still exists in many different ways. And part of it is, I think I'm learning now that the part of it is mainly due to how we link the work as a product, and it isn't. So separating it into the, into the rights and to the cultural sort of helps to bring about the dignity, and only looking at the achievements um, and the products as the, what we're paying for, not the actual human labor itself. Huge, huge paradigm shift, I guess.
Yeah, the when at the beginning of this chapter when he was talking about the nerve sense pole, and the reason he connects this with the economic life is because the nerve sense pole of our human organism is the most independent. It is the least full of life, and it's something almost detachable from the human organ. Is the organ itself is not really it's sort of separate from us, whereas you can't really do that with our rhythmic system. Our circulation system is really tied up with our whole organism, and we can't really just strip it out and replace it. I mean, we can replace a heart or lung perhaps, but what I'm trying to say is the economic life is the life of goods, which are separable. the it's a very different thing to be talking about the human being itself, which is the rights question. And the rights issue is about that human dignity and the human being and the quality of being human,
Mhm,
right? So that everything that has to do with humanness needs to move into the rights life.
mhm,
And also I want to share this notion that we have to rethink the whole notion of government. We can't just borrow. I don't think Steiner's suggesting that we have the existing government and we just give it a new paint job and now it's a threefold government. I think you have to think of history. There's been so many different kinds of governments, and he's imagining a new kind of government again. He's not just saying the government we have now, we're just going to copy paste it into a threefold society and it's going to somehow work better. I think we have to completely reimagine what we think of as government or as a right state. Can you imagine something that is only democratic, only based on the democratic impulses and rights consciousness that people come together and decide about? It's nothing else. It's not going to
mhm,
be this big structure that we have today. It won't
mhm,
be running public works. It won't be running bridges and hospitals and schools, and it won't be doing any of this stuff.
mhm.
We have to rethink.
How does Steiner sort of account for the different, when you say sort of based on um, democratic impulses, how does Steiner um, account for the uh, narcissistic, sociopathic personality types that really are attracted by government. Um, Not all of them, but a large number. Does he account for that at all?
Well, not overtly, but I think he doesn't imagine that we have to be a new morally better group of people before the threefolding can happen.
Hmm.
He imagines this in the context of existing people, how people are. And
Hmm.
so if we imagine there are these tendencies
Hmm.
and and that this will just be a fact that certain people are going to have certain biases and viewpoints and individual tendencies and maybe, you know, psychological disorders and who knows what. And they're
Hmm.
going to be involved in government, they're going to be involved in economics, they're going to be involved in culture, all kinds of different aspects of society. And I
Hmm.
think it's more like how is it possible for us to build institutions that sort of temper this? And for example, one of them is the division of labor, right? So if you're producing bread and I'm producing apples, or we're all producing different things, and I produce something that you need and you produce something I need, we can exchange these things, and it really doesn't matter if I'm a sociopath.
Hmm.
As long as we can agree on a fair price and we make the exchange, then we just go on. And so we're looking at how to build institutions that work against these negative tendencies in people that do exist. And
Hmm.
another example is this labor framework, the new labor framework. So if we separate, if we're no longer purchasing labor and we're only purchasing the results, then in a way it doesn't matter if your boss is a psychopath because they're not purchasing your labor in any case,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And there might be, and if the manager of an organization is chosen not because they're rich, but because the cultural life vets them as for their competence, then there's a better chance that the manager is going to be someone that you want to work for.
Hmm.
So by changing the institutions, we will sort of naturally work against these all too human tendencies.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, always there's people that push back and all of that, but I hear what you're saying. You're saying that the structure and the organism itself can mitigate um, just based on how it is. I mean, I'd really like to sort of follow through on real world examples of how that structure might have shifted a particular occurrence that we know of. I think that would be very helpful to ground it for me at least to understand, okay, this particular um, thing happened and how would this potentially have been different? What are the stop gaps that could have helped create a better situation? I think that would be
Do you have something in mind?
I mean, just a very simple, um, you know, I watch too many movies, I think, sort of mafioso kind of coming in and sort of threatening, well, you got to give me half your income, or, just,
So for example, in the case of extortionist lending practices, I think that might be a function of the inability of people to get credit. I could imagine in a social threefolding scenario that there would be the economic association or a financial community there to provide credit. And so these people wouldn't have to turn to lenders uh, like this who are predatory because they have other choices.
mhm,
I
mhm,
think the money system itself in this case is what drives the people, only the people that have money, they can then become predatory over the people that need money.
mhm,
And that's what gives rise to certain kinds of behaviors.
Hmm.
that brings their unhealthy human tendencies to the foreground.
Hmm.
But if you had a situation where ordinary people could have better access to credit on
Hmm.
the basis of a community money system or some kind of financial community, as I talk about in my book, then these tendencies might be there, but not so prominent.
Hmm. Or what about when a politician is put in place based on exactly what you were saying, that wouldn't happen, hopefully, in this situation, where a politician, through the funding and the money that, they have, their family has, or there's a legacy or some kind of, because, people know people and they want this guy in because he's going to listen more to what we need. Um, and, we'll have the back door to bribe them, even though the system may not sort of have we're choosing somebody in the background that appears competent in the governmental position or whatever. Um, but there's a whole wheeling and dealing that has been done in the background to get this person in the foreground. Um, do you know what I mean?
I
Like,
do. I do.
yeah, yeah.
And so for example, I also think about the so-called revolving door between politics and media.
Hmm.
So, for instance, a lot of politicians become in the media, and a lot of media people become politicians
Hmm.
because there's a propaganda element to how the media promotes this or that group. Some people get airtime, some people don't. And so politics can be manipulated by media if it's
Hmm.
under the control. And for instance, if the media is funded by economic interests, then
Hmm.
it becomes a real trifecta of corruption because the economic interests are funding the media or bringing in the politicians who will then help the economic interests.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is in a threefold society, this would all work very differently. The media would be independent. They would be funded through taxation, sort of pipelined through taxes, but not controlled by the government at all. They would be independent media and well funded. The politicians would not have any say over um, uh, economic industry decision making, jobs, job creation, interest rates. They have nothing to do with that. And so they can pass a law, but it won't cause this to happen. And so having somebody placed in that position of a politician isn't necessarily going to bring a benefit to the
Hmm.
economic interests. The
Hmm.
economic interests will be served by the economic associations, and
Hmm.
that's where the economic people will want to have the right people for their interests. But then
Hmm.
the economic associations are going to have not only producers but also consumers in there.
Hmm.
And so they're going to temper all this, and it's all going to find a kind of balance, you see.
Hmm. And tell me if I'm going off in a tangent, and you don't have to answer the question if it's not appropriate. Um, all these things are coming up from like the blackmail, foreign governments spying, holding things against. I'm not thinking that, this is you have said it's not a utopia, it's not an answer to everything, but I'm just kind of curious to see if this could, if the imagination of Steiner, because this is how it seems the elite operate. It's what I have on you, and how I'm going to uh, navigate and manipulate through that. So it's kind of a dark mind. Again,
Oh,
too
it's
many movies.
yeah, no, it's a very important question because
Mm.
this all happens because we don't have an independent rights life. The rights of people are not independent of the economy or of the forces at play. So that allows all kinds of corruption to happen, that the economic interests can prevent certain people from being prosecuted. And this is not right. I think if the people want certain laws to be in place, then the law making and the law enforcement is entirely independent of the economic life. And so people will be prosecuted and not just left unprosecuted for illegal activities, as
Hmm.
happens today. So there would be a separation of the lawmaking and law enforcement would be entirely independent of all these forces of powers and so on.
Hmm.
And also to say that in Steiner's imagination, the state is not running anything, right? The state is not running the police. The politicians are not in charge of the police.
Hmm.
The politicians are not in charge of the military. The politicians are not in charge of unemployment or anything like this, or education or hospitals. They are merely pipelining tax money from the economic life by a fairness principle into all these separate organizations that are independent. So the police, for instance, they would be under the Constitution and the rule of law, but they would not be under politicians. They would have an independence. And so otherwise there would be no way to prosecute politicians.
Hmm.
They need to be independent.
Hmm. Okay. I appreciate you answering my questions because all of this stuff definitely is what we're living in right now, and in some form or another. And I'm not trying to disparage. I think there are wonderful, beautiful people in politics and in private life and all of that. But there are the nefarious ones as well, which cause problems for the rest of us, right? So,
Yeah.
hmm,
That's because our whole law enforcement system is compromised
mhm,
through the unification of state and economy. And it is necessary, really necessary, that these become separate.
mhm,
This
okay,
is a high priority. We should not sleep until we get this done.
hmm, okay,
And I talk about how to do this in my book, Money for a Threefold Society.
okay,
I describe how this can be done. We have to establish a separate money system
mhm,
because as long as the money is being issued by the governments, by the treasury departments, we will never have an escape of corruption.
hmm,
So we have to remove the power of money from the government,
mhm,
and we have to remove the power of private ownership from the economic life because ownership is a rights question, not a commodity question.
mhm,
And so we need to separate the money system and put that in the hands of the economic people. We
mhm,
separate the ownership system and put that in the hands of the rights life managed by competent people through the spiritual cultural life.
mhm,
And
mhm,
by separating these three, then we have some chance of doing this.
mhm,
But just talking about it and shaking our fist is not going to bring it about. We
mhm,
need to establish an independent money system
mhm,
because any social reform we try today will fail because we're still bound to the money system of the government, and the money and that money has a power over us. So we can change something and then they'll just change it back.
mhm, mhm,
Things are the way they are because the money interests want things to be the way they are.
mhm.
So the first thing we need to do is change the money interests.
Mhm. All right.
Okay?
Very cool. Thank
So
you.
we go
Yes.
on. Yeah.
Hmm.
So the next paragraph, one possibility to avoid. So again, he's talking about solutions here. In this little paragraph, he says, in those cases where the economic life is too tightly restricted by natural conditions, it is sometimes possible, for example, to make soil more productive by technical means, such as composting, fertilizing, or liming. And in a similar way, if the economic life is too tightly restricted from the other side by labor regulations, it may be possible to increase the productivity of labor by technical means, for example, through labor-saving devices and capital. However, such changes should not come directly and unilaterally from the economic life. all such changes must arise out of the insight that develops within the independent rights life. Okay, if you could read that, please.
Yep. One possibility to avoid the rights life reducing economic prosperity too much consists in doing something similar to what needs to be done to improve the natural conditions. We can make low-yielding soil more productive by technical means. Prompted by an excessive reduction in prosperity, we can change the type and amount of labor. But this change should not come directly from the cycle of the economic life, but rather from the insight that develops on the basis of the rights life, independently of the economic life.
So this relates to what we were saying before about, if we want to have 6 months of vacation every year, well, then you have to accept that we maybe have robots or something doing some manual labor for us. And we
Mhm,
need to develop these technologies and invest capital into these technologies so that we
mhm,
can have these leisure time, right? But he's saying some of this technological advancements can be very disruptive, right? And so this should never happen just as an economic initiative. This needs to be coordinated with the democratic rights life so that there isn't a massive unemployment created or wealth redistribution. As it's something that we need to manage through the rights consciousness and not just have it cast upon people by
right,
the economic decision makers, right?
right.
Often today, our existence is tied to work. So if you don't work, you don't get money. If you don't have money, you may not have a home. You may not have food. And so it's a threat when someone comes along and says, we're going to develop all these new technologies that are going to displace jobs.
Mhm,
That's seen as a threat
mhm,
because our system makes people dependent on jobs.
mhm,
But if we had a different system where the right to income is not connected to the economic life, when everyone as a rights matter can decide together democratically, this is how much work we're going to do or that, and the economic life has to follow this, then it will make decisions that are not going to threaten people. So having more, say, robots or something to displace jobs is not going to threaten people because it may enable us to have longer vacations, which
mhm,
is it's a good thing.
mhm, mhm, mhm. So, and I mean, I guess that would also entail looking at what, I mean, these days they say minimum wage, we have to raise the minimum wage. Businesses will say, gosh, if you raise the minimum wage, I won't be able to stay afloat. Because, hey, a cup of coffee costs X amount, and there's no way that people are going to pay like $10 for, even though we do, uh, for a cup of coffee, which is what I'm going to need to charge somebody to keep them employed. So, I think that, the fight that you talk about, between the worker and the employer, kind of the struggle where, a living wage, uh, the rights conscious life deciding that we're going to work 40 hours or 30 hours or 20 hours, whatever the case may be. But then we would then need to have enough money coming in order to be able to pay the bills. And no matter what the level of work is, to be able to survive, more than survive, to live a life. So how does that sort of translate with this? How is this different to what is done today?
Yeah, it's very different. So
Mhm,
you spoke about minimum wage. Minimum
mhm,
wage is a concept where the law will require the employer to pay someone, even if the employer cannot afford this. And in some cases, a minimum wage legislation can cause businesses to go under. So the different way of thinking is that it's about redistribution of wealth. So over on one side, you have small businesses trying to make ends meet. Minimum wage is a threat because it will put them out of business. Then you have the other extreme where you have these highly capitalized organizations, trillion-dollar companies that have huge technological capital, and they are making profits in the billions of dollars, and there's no connection between the two, right? So the how does this money get redirected from the highly capitalized companies to where it is needed in the small businesses or the supplementation of standards of living for ordinary people? And I think the concept is the link is the new ownership framework. Okay. So when capital is owned by private individuals in the capitalist system, then the private individuals get to keep all the benefits and the wealth that comes from capital ownership. And they don't have to share it with the ordinary person. In a socialist world, this is the Marxist idea, then you would therefore, according to their logic, then capital should be owned by the collective, by the state, and they will handle all the redistribution and it'll be fair. But then the Marxists forget that when you do that, you lose the private interest in capital development and capital management. And so it becomes this kind of bureaucratic stifling of capital that ends up the profits don't actually get generated. So the question is, how do we do it a different way? Not capitalism, not socialism, but how do we organize things so that competent managers are privately managing the capital? They are receiving some of the benefit, but then some of the benefit goes back to society and is redistributed so that not private individuals are getting all the wealth benefits of capital ownership, but now the whole society is getting the benefits of capital ownership. And
Hmm.
then there would be an alignment with everyone to this capital ownership and capital formation.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
It sort of is. I'm struggling a little bit, you know, based on what you've said. Yes, I understand that the socialist idea is to kind of take, okay, more taxes. I think that's correct me if I'm misunderstanding anything. So like, okay,
Well,
you're a bit, yeah, go ahead.
it's not that the socialists want to tax more. That's the social
Mhm.
democrats.
Okay,
Socialists want to own things. So,
okay.
so instead of like, I don't know, pick a company, I don't know, SpaceX or something, instead of Elon Musk owning the rockets and the launch center, the government would own the launch center and the rockets. You see, that's the
Mhm.
socialist idea.
Okay.
And then all the profits that come from the SpaceX company would then be re-channeled into for the public benefit.
Hmm.
That's socialism.
Hmm.
Social democracy says we're going to keep capitalism, we're just going to tax it.
Hmm.
This is also a bad idea because it's a recessionary concept. It actually represses the formation and growth of capital.
Okay.
What Steiner's saying is something completely different from this. You
Okay.
could imagine, let's say Elon Musk is vetted by the cultural life to say, this guy is really good at building rockets, and we want him to build rockets. Well, this is a good thing for us. But he's not going to own everything. We're going to issue a new kind of money, and the money is issued by communities, and the communities will then finance and own the rockets that he builds. So he has all the freedom to build the rockets. The the community has the ownership of the rockets, and they work out a share so that Mr. Musk gets some of the profits and the society gets some of the profits. It's a
Hmm.
profit sharing idea, not a tax and spend idea. It's not a getting rid of the private entrepreneur idea.
Hmm.
It's a new ownership concept that allows some of the wealth to be redistributed to people who need it.
Okay. So, in this idea, you're using Musk as an example, and it's a good example because I think it, people know about him, right? So, at least in the public sphere. So he, how would he be incentivized to take on an incredibly gargantuan task as such as that. And, why would he continue to do it if he's not going to have lots of wealth, and be able to pay for his great grandchildren's lives, whatever? Like, what would incentive, like, there would be a negotiation, I would imagine, right? Like, because that's what high level people do. I think they've gone through a lot of challenges that would get them to this place to be so brilliant, to, you know, arrive at this place where they could even um, be recognized as a competent person. They've gone through massive challenges. Like if a person were to say, listen, we'll give you some of the money, but the rest of it goes away. I can imagine, I mean, hey, if there is a philanthropist in that person, they would be like, yeah, let's go for it. But if there's like, no, absolutely not. I want to take that wealth and I want to build other things, and you're not going to dictate what I will do. I'm just, I don't even
So,
know what. Yeah.
I want to just say, why, Linda, do you think that he should not be wealthy? I'm not saying this at all. Because this is how things work today. He has shareholders, okay? He has to pay dividends. He does not get all the wealth. This is not true. He has to share the wealth with the capital providers. This is how it already is. He does not get 100%. He gets some portion that the high level discussions work out that he gets so much for management. He may be a shareholder, but he gets a certain amount and the shareholders get another amount. And what I'm saying is all we do is replace the shareholders with the social owners so that it's not funded privately, it's funded through community ownership, but it is managed privately with the incentive exactly as we have them today.
Hmm.
And then the money that normally flows to the private shareholders now flows to society, not in a Marxist way, but it's not taxes, it's a profit share concept.
Hmm. Hmm. This this is really important because I think that when someone hears this, they're going to go, you're trying to take away my capital, right? So I think that point that you just made was extremely important and underlines all of this because I think the difference between having someone, because the fear of socialism or somebody who might like the idea of socialism would kind of grab this and say, yes, this is socialist idea. But really, what you're sort of the example that you're giving is really key, that it already is happening because private individuals are giving him capital. They're what do they call them? Uh,
Well, investors, shareholders.
Investors. There you go, investors. Um, and so there's an agreement there that not all of the wealth goes to Elon Musk, obviously. And what you're saying is the communities will be like if there is something that the world deems that they need or that community deems that they need, the community will finance. And obviously, having vetted, I think that's the important piece as well, having vetted the person as a competent person that can do the job and can bring in goodness for humanity, for the community, that they will themselves then share in the profit, just as is happening now. And it's not an element of, okay, Elon Musk's just going to get a salary because, that's negotiated, but it's going to be a measly amount.
Yeah.
It actually isn't.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of strange misunderstandings about Steiner that he's a socialist. He's not a socialist, right? He describes the new ownership framework as the next evolution of private ownership. And we spoke earlier about the mafia, right? And the reason that we have private shareholders is the fact of the way the money system works. You can't just invent your own money. you have to get it from somewhere. You have to get it from the banking system. You have to get it from the wealthy. So the wealthy who have the money are the ones that provide the credit for the shareholders to purchase the capital development, and then the managers can operate it. But if we had a different money system where the community is printing the money, not the government, and the community can then finance the capital, that and the cultural life chooses the manager, then we create a completely different ownership framework, which is not socialist in any way. There's still an incentive for the manager to earn well and to become very wealthy. In fact, Steiner speaks a lot about gift money. The gift money is essential to the economic process, he says. How on earth are we going to have gift money if we don't have rich people? It's not logical to think that Steiner didn't believe in rich people. This is nonsense. This is a misunderstanding. He
Mhm.
wanted people to be wealthy. In fact, it'd be great if everyone was wealthy.
Mhm.
He's not an advocate of poverty at all.
Mhm.
If someone has great ability, they need to be put into place in the society where they can manifest this ability for the sake of everyone.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in the case of SpaceX, I mean, this has potential. Not only are they doing the Starlink program, but potentially they can move to other places like the moon or asteroids and do mining that will make the mining on Earth seem trivial.
Mhm.
They may discover entire um, meteors made of titanium or something that are larger than any amount of resources on Earth. And so the wealth possibility that's opened up through, say, space exploration is enormous. It's trillions of dollars will be like a shadow of small change
Mhm.
in the future, you know,
Mhm.
and the wealth creation, how it's a matter of distribution. How can we bring this wealth not into private to make private people rich, that the gap between the rich and poor grows, but rather how can we redistribute the profits? How can we share so that the entrepreneurs get their fair share, but also the ordinary people do too?
Mhm.
That's how we're thinking of this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, this is again important. I think the word redistribution is very connected to socialist ideas. So that redistribution may trip up people. So I think what you just basically showed, it's really the money system that have. Am I right in understanding that you came up with that idea, or is that the money system, like how to do this? Like, did you like, because I think
Uh,
people have been struggling with all of this, haven't they, to try and get it to work somehow?
I think if I came up with anything, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants,
Mm,
and I can see a little further. But I think my contribution to the subject is a small increment. I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of Steiner and other people who have done a lot of work in this area. But I do think there's a little insight that comes up, and it makes it possible to rethink how to make this a practical possibility in real life and not just
mhm,
talking and talking, right?
mhm, mhm,
So, so going back to what you said about the word redistribution, I don't mean to say it mean it's more like the referee in the game deciding who gets the yellow card and who gets the red card. You know,
mhm,
there's a redistribution that happens on the basis of rights and fairness and laws, not on the arbitrary will of some politician who likes you better than another person, right? So
mhm,
this is not what I mean. I mean the rights life would establish certain standard of living standards, benchmarks, and then there would be the money that comes in through taxes or through profit sharing would then be reallocated to where people need it according to these laws. It
mhm,
would be used to
mhm,
fund education, but independent education. It would be used to fund independent medical. It'd be used to fund independent pharmaceutical research, independent scientific research, independent media. All of these things would need a lot of money to be funded, but it's more like a pipeline that the government is not taking it and then holding it and then deciding where it goes. The
Mhm.
allocation would occur on the basis of democratic rights decisions and laws.
Right. And that sounds like it, I mean, every few years we kind of get this flow of, like you said, to the left a little bit, and then, oh, now the people don't like how much restrictions there are, so then we go to the right. And it's like this, oh, now we don't like how greedy the capitalists are and how the wealth disparity is. So it's like, this is speaking to a, a kind of an ongoing conversation to understand in the time what is needed for the population, and it is a fair system to all. It's not utopian, but it's more fair because we're not having that wealth disparity, but there is a level of people feeling like they're actually not just feeling, they are contributing. They're um, communities are contributing to, say, Elon Musk, to use that example that you gave, Elon Musk's rocket building, because we believe in it, because it's good for humanity. So we're going to absolutely partake in that. And therefore, with that, as investment, then comes the profit sharing that happens. And then that redistribution happens through the community, I'm assuming, sort of.
No,
No?
this is it. What I'm saying is, my imagination at least is that the democratic side of things would just establish rules and laws, but they would not actually do the final decision making. That would have to be done by the cultural life.
Okay, right.
And
Yeah.
that's why it's so independent that there are three different independent entities and not just two.
Okay.
Because the cultural life is going to look at, what are the real abilities of people. They're going to understand those things, and then they'll be able to say, well, here's someone with abilities. We need to bring them into a place where they
Hmm.
can manifest these abilities. And the rights life is there to say, to guarantee a living standard, for instance. So
Hmm.
people that may not have abilities, they still need life support, and they
Yeah.
need dignity, and they need a human existence. And so there needs to be laws in place that say, well, not minimum wage laws, because that puts the onus on the employer, but to say there's a law where we will then support every individual to have a dignified life. And
Beautiful.
then they will channel the funds like
Right.
pipeline. I use that word pipeline because it's not that they're taking the funds and then handing them on. It's literally they don't get to touch them as
Hmm.
they go past. They don't get to siphon off any of the funds. They're
Hmm.
just really just redirecting it according to law.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. What about people who don't have abilities that are helpful to, like, from the disabled, or, in whatever way, shape, or form. So this also covers that, is what I'm hearing you say, that it's not just the able-bodied people,
Correct.
but it is the people who have maybe limitations or a need, and each community and cultural, like the regulations are there for fairness, and to and are considering all of these, all of the spectrum of kind of humanity, how they show up. Okay.
Yeah, the rights life is the life of the human relations. And
Yes.
and this does not depend on your abilities, on your wealth, on your family background, your class, your height or weight or anything like that. It's literally, if you're a human being, then you have rights. And and this includes the right to dignity, the right to a humane existence. And
Hmm.
this needs to be supported. The rights of dignity need to come from some way, some allocation, some redistribution. I mean, this is just a fact
Hmm.
that some people cannot earn. the children, seniors, disabled, the ill. There are many people who cannot earn, but they're still humans and they need to
Mhm.
be supported by everyone else.
Mhm.
And if we
Mhm.
had a system where the capital was properly managed and wealth was not sort of congested in the hands of a few private people, but was allocated back and reallocated, then we would have plenty of wealth. It's not we don't have a wealth problem, we have a distribution problem.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. This was very interesting, Mike.
Okay.
Very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's where we'll leave it for this time, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time, everyone.
All right. Bye for now. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.